Welcome everyone to Stories of Hope, Overcoming Adversity and Building Resistance. I'm Madeline Ziniak, and I'm here to introduce a fabulous inspirational panel that I think we're all going to take away excellent learnings. So I'd like to introduce our panel and also to say that we're delighted to be working with the Association of Canadian Studies and being able to bring to you these inspirational stories that will certainly move society forward in a very positive fashion. Our first guest is Hanadi Saad, and she is the founder of Justice Femme, which combats all forms of discrimination against women of diverse backgrounds. And so important at this time to have an organization such as that. Hanadi was named one of the top 25 women of influence in Canada in 2020. And during the pandemic, she created a project to support seniors and health personnel in affected seniors' homes in Quebec. Our next guest is Rosemary Sadler, and she is an author, social justice advocate, and consultant. She is an Order of Ontario recipient and also an award-winning author, speaker, and a community activist, and most notably is founder and president of the Black Canadian Network and chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society in the Toronto branch, and former president of the Ontario Black History Society, where she held this position over 23 years. And as the Order of Ontario recipient, she was recognized as an expert on the history of Black Canadians. And I know personally that she has worked tirelessly in pushing issues of justice forward. Our next guest is Michelle Douglas, who is the Lbgtq, a human rights activist. Her story is profound. She served as an officer in the Canadian Armed Forces from 1986, and despite an exemplary and perfect service record, Michelle was unceremoniously fired from the military in 1989 as part of the military's LGBT purge. She launched a landmark legal challenge against the military's discriminatory policies, and her lawsuit resulted in the ending of Canada's formalized discriminatory policies against LGBT members of the military in 1992. She's been an active part of the movement looking for legal equality for the LGBTQ and community for the past 30 years. She currently serves as the executive director of the newly established organization known as the LGBT Purge Fund. And this was established as part of the LGBT Purge Class Action Lawsuit Settlement. Welcome, panelists. And we're going to be able to have translation also. I just want to remind our audience that translation is available. And also you're able to submit questions through the Q&A chat forum here on this fantastic virtual presentation. So to begin, we'd like to ask Hanadi to come forward and meet our audience and tell your story. Hanadi.
Bonjour, hi everyone. So I will be the first one to break the ice, and let me speak in French, okay? So my name is Hanadi. Je suis éducatrice spécialisée. J'œuvre dans le domaine de l'éducation depuis déjà 16 ans. Alors, je vais faire ma présentation en deux parties. La première, je vais dire pourquoi j'ai créé Justice Femme, le contexte actuel au Québec. Et la deuxième partie va parler de la loi 21, la loi sur la laïcité de l'État, l'état de la situation. Je vais conclure avec deux phrases. Alors, notre société est aux prises avec une crise sanitaire. Je tiens à saluer le courage, le dévouement des enseignants, des enseignantes qui vivent un stress sans précédent et qui voient leurs conditions de travail se détériorer. Comme on a pu constater à travers les médias, les débats identitaires qui ont émergé lors de notre dernière décennie n'ont cessé d'exercer le malaise lié au climat de la discrimination envers certaines minorités culturelles et religieuses dans notre société. Force de constater que la population qui cristallise cette tension était et le sont encore les femmes musulmanes qui portent le voile. Ainsi, face à la multiplication des cas de discrimination, d'abus, j'ai créé Justice Femme, Femmes pour le dire, Femmes pour agir en 2013, durant le débat de la charte à cette époque-là, afin de répondre à l'urgence des appels de détresse émanant à la réalité du terrain, œuvrant de manière concrète à défendre les droits des femmes issues des minorités. La mission principale de cet organisme est de lutter contre toute forme de haine, de racisme, de discrimination, l'exclusion à l'égard des femmes victimes, en offrant un soutien juridique et psychologique pour les femmes touchées par ces méfaits. Des exemples de services qui ont été offerts et qui continuent à être offerts: défense des cas, soutien juridique et moral, ateliers et conférences, like Stand Up for Your Right, comment saisir vos droits, et des ateliers d'autodéfense. Quelques années plus tard, on arrive, l'année dernière, en 2019, on a vu la CAQ, le gouvernement actuel, présenter une loi qui est la loi 21, la loi sur la laïcité de l'État. Je vais faire une mise en contexte de cette loi. Alors, on voit dans notre système d'éducation, déjà, au Québec, il y a plus que 250 classes qui sont sans enseignants assignés. Ça, c'est l'année dernière. Alors, aujourd'hui, on constate qu'on n'a pas encore les chiffres. La situation est beaucoup plus grave avec la pandémie qu'on traverse, vu le taux d'absentéisme, les cas des enseignants, le manque déjà auparavant des enseignants, et la pandémie a accentué le problème. Et cette loi-là vient priver certaines minorités qui sont... avant de parler de ça, je vais parler de ce qu'on voit maintenant aussi dans les écoles, c'est que certaines écoles à Montréal, dans la grande région de Montréal surtout, ils n'ont même pas de remplaçantes aussi ou de remplaçants d'enseignants. Ils font recours à des éducatrices ou des étudiantes en enseignement. Ça, c'est l'état actuel de la situation. Alors, la loi 21, elle est venue, la loi sur la laïcité, elle aussi, elle n'aide pas dans ce sens-là. La loi sur la laïcité, je vais l'expliquer en quelques mots. La loi sur la laïcité vise à interdire aux employés de certaines minorités religieuses qui portent un signe visible tel que le kippa, le turban, le voile, d'occuper certains postes d'autorité, comme policiers, juges, gardiens de prison et les enseignants. Rappelons que cette loi a été adoptée sous Bayon en mai 2019. Alors, depuis l'adoption de la loi sur la laïcité, que selon nous, il y a 5 poursuites juridiques maintenant qui sont en cours, de 5 groupes différents. Cette loi contrevient à la Charte québécoise des droits et libertés de la personne en discriminant certaines communautés en raison de leurs croyances religieuses. Le gouvernement contourne ainsi les principes de justice et d'égalité qui sont inscrites par la Charte. Aussi, renforçons le système systémique. Donc, on ouvre la porte à l'interprétation de la loi, à discriminer des personnes même avant l'application de la loi. Alors, Justice Femmes a constaté depuis les débats sur la laïcité qui sont trop souvent en conséquence de cibler et d'exclure certains groupes, en particulier des personnes déjà racisées. Alors, pour contribuer à ce débat social qui est extrêmement toxique, la loi sur la laïcité, la loi 21, qui vise l'interdiction et renforce les préjugés courants, elle réduit le jugement de certaines personnes à leurs croyances religieuses uniquement parce qu'elle en porte le signe. Or, des exemples d'exercice de discrimination par des personnes en situation d'autorité ne portant pas de signes religieux sont bien documentés. Justice Femmes recense depuis des années de nombreux exemples de profilage racial, social, politique qui sont à l'œuvre de forces policières qui font justement partie des catégories d'emploi visées par la loi 21. La loi 21 a ouvert la porte aussi à un pouvoir arbitraire de la part de ceux et celles qui sont chargés de faire respecter cette loi et a occasionné beaucoup de dérives. Chaque personne se croit d'autorité à interpréter à son tour ce qui est un signe religieux, ce qui n'est pas, et s'en prend à des personnes qui le portent. Cette loi est une manifestation, ce qu'on appelle du racisme systémique. En fait, le racisme systémique repose entre autres aussi à un ensemble de règles et de pratiques formelles ou informelles qui peuvent être neutres en apparence et sans intention raciste, mais qui désavantagent dans les faits des personnes racisées. Donc, l'interdiction de ces signes religieux, bien qu'elle vise tous les groupes religieux, a néanmoins un effet beaucoup plus grand sur certaines minorités déjà racisées à la base, dont la religion peut supposer des pratiques visibles, minorités qui sont d'ailleurs souvent déjà affectées par d'autres formes d'exclusion en matière d'emploi, de santé, d'éducation et de représentation. La loi 21 enfreint et renforce le racisme systémique. Je me permets de faire un état de la situation. Depuis la loi 21, nous avons constaté une augmentation anormale d'incidents crimineux, ainsi la détérioration du climat social. Et on a reçu des nombres inquiétants à l'organisme des plaintes et d'appels depuis le dépôt même du projet de loi, avant même son adoption, allant même en ouvrant la porte à des regards méprisants à l'extérieur, à des crachats, discrimination à l'embauche, en dehors même des emplois qui sont visés par la loi, comme par exemple en éducation, entrevue dans ça peut être un autre emploi à la fonction publique qui ne sont pas visés par cette loi, ces emplois-là. Alors, on a vu aussi une cinquantaine d'enseignants qui portent le hijab, le voile islamique, se sont fait discriminer à l'embauche par plusieurs commissions scolaires dans la grande région de Montréal. Des enquêtes et des plaintes par Justice Femmes ont été moi-même, je les ai déposées à la Commission des droits de la personne pour motif de discrimination à l'embauche. Une trentaine d'enseignants qualifiés portant le hijab ont juste renoncé l'année dernière. Cette année, on n'a pas les chiffres encore, recensé aussi d'enseigner dans plusieurs vivent des dépressions depuis l'adoption de la loi et de l'exclusion et des situations financières très précaires. Nous avons aussi constaté depuis de détérioration même à l'ambiance au travail par rapport à la tenue vestimentaire. Il y a eu beaucoup d'harcèlement aussi, de l'intimidation au travail par des collègues ou par des supérieurs. Les lieux publics, j'en ai parlé. Aussi, nous avons recensé jusqu'à septembre une centaine de cas d'agression physique. Aussi. La majorité des cas, plus que 90% des cas, n'ont jamais été rapportés aux autorités parce que les femmes disent, nous n'avons plus confiance en notre système si nous avons déjà un gouvernement qui est en train de légitimiser la discrimination. Alors, ça c'est le parcours, le pourquoi de Justice Femmes, de l'ouverture, de la création de Justice Femmes. Je vais terminer mon mot avec un mot de fin qui dit, en tant que femme, je souligne un énorme recul de notre société québécoise quant aux droits de la femme, par la perte de l'autonomie financière, l'égalité homme-femme quant à l'accès aussi à l'emploi, ainsi qu'à l'exclusion sociale. Alors, je serai disponible pour répondre à vos questions. Je pourrais expliquer davantage aussi les poursuites judiciaires contre la loi 21. Et puis, je vais terminer juste en disant aussi que pendant la pandémie, j'ai fait ma part personnellement aussi en soutenant le personnel dans la santé et les personnes âgées. Et dernièrement, je suis personnellement en train de travailler sur un projet dans ma région de Montréal pour donner un dépliant ou un booklet, un genre de livret pour les services et les ressources et le soutien psychologique aux personnes âgées qu'on voit et des femmes qui sont les plus touchées par cette pandémie. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Hanadi. Words of inspiration once again. And now, very pleased to introduce to the stage Rosemary Sadler. Rosemary. Well, we're still waiting to hear from Rosemary, but Hanadi, I did want to thank you very much for your great remarks. And oh, there you are, Rosemary. Welcome.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I wanted to thank all of you for inviting us oh, sorry, I have a little blockage here. There we go. Thank you so much for having me as part of your session today. I hope that you will take something away from this that will be helpful to you in what you're doing in your schools. But I want to start out with a question. Did you know that we almost did not have a Black History Month? I was an at-home mom in 1993, and I was still nursing my third child and found myself also serving as the newly elected president of the Ontario Black History Society, the only provincial heritage organization in Canada dedicated to Black history. Holding the position was a sacred trust to me, to be able to support and reflect the Black experience. Really hadn't been done much prior to that. We realized a few weeks before February 1994 that we were required to formally request a petition from the City of Toronto for Black History Month, something that unfortunately Dr. Daniel G. Hill had not done. Luckily, we did do it, and I vowed that I would make sure that never happened again. I secured an annual automatic proclamation from the City of Toronto, then with the province of Ontario through our contact with the ministry, Daniel O'Brien, then with all provinces, including Manitoba, until after an outreach I made to numerous members of Parliament, where it finally did land with Jean Augustine. The moment when she agreed to support it was at a fundraiser being held at Denham Jolly's home, the person behind the first Black radio station in Canada. She agreed in the presence of Lloyd Perry, and it was passed in December 1995. I was notified of the course of events and orchestrated a bus tour to Ottawa for this first national celebration of February as Black History Month. And I was honored to bring remarks on behalf of the Black community at that momentous inaugural occasion with the Prime Minister and the scant members of the Black Caucus in February 1996. I had built upon the efforts of those who had gone before to raise awareness. Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black History Month, the Canadian Negro Women's Association, who held celebrations in the 1950s, the founders of the Ontario Black History Society. And I had likely provided over 2,000 talks in schools, community settings, churches, wherever, between my first volunteer efforts with the organization in 1989 and then continuing as the president. I had successfully built up and vastly extended a Canadian community of interest, and I raised the profile and viability of the OBHS, which you may be interested in knowing had our budget cut by 90% at one point in time. I was not paid, so it didn't affect my salary, but it affected the viability of the organization. And this is before social media and GoFundMe. I used my own gas, phone, my fax, yes, we had faxes, and then later my computer to continue the work. I hosted meetings in my home and provided dinner to my board so that I could deal with the challenges of childcare, or should I say no childcare. I did infinitely more than just writing a letter. Such was my commitment, my resilience, and my hope for a more equitable society. I truly felt that if Black and other racial ethnic groups just learned more about the contributions, achievements, and experiences of Black people in this country, that it would help. I hope that Black history education would roll out from kindergarten to grade 12, inspired and now supported by a national declaration of February as Black History Month, in addition to the provincial ones I had already succeeded in obtaining and the municipal ones that had existed since 1979 in the City of Toronto. It was a diversity focus in an otherwise white slate of celebrations. I was also the proponent for many other commemorations of people, places, and events at all levels of government, again doing the hard, time-consuming work of contacting people, planning events, engaging people in events, writing curricula pieces, doing interviews. In 1995, I advanced the commemoration of August 1st as Emancipation Day. As proposed to me by a fellow public education activist from Trinidad and Tobago. This commemoration has been successful with the City of Toronto, Metro Toronto, the City of Ottawa, and it was the first unanimous all-party bill of the province of Ontario. It has gone to second reading twice in the House, twice in the Senate, and today actually is the 2-year anniversary of that second reading. As of this moment, with COVID-19 interruptions, it is still pending. We're waiting for the second and third reading to come up probably in December. But why do this? Because Black history is Canadian history, a history that is not widely nor routinely shared. The other pandemic is a racial one, and we need to take steps to address this one as well, the racial one that exists. We can connect the current reawakening about the presence of systemic racism to our history in this country. We share a history with the United States. We too had slavery, the enslavement of Pani, or First Nations, and Africans. It started with the French and it continued under British rule. We too had race riots, with one of the earliest and longest taking place in Shelburne, Nova Scotia in 1734. And we won't talk about the Yonge Street riots in the 1990s. While we were the free North for those on the Underground Railroad, the first freedom movement of the Americas, we too had segregation in schools, housing, restaurants, hotels, services, skating rinks, and the denial of entrance to professional schools. We too had members and activity by the Ku Klux Klan. We too have had the over-surveillance and overuse of charges and lethal force by the police. Our hope lies in our resistance. Black lives matter. Thank you again so much to the organizers for bringing attention to the idea of hope, because there is hope in these pandemics. Thank you to those who have chosen to watch for their efforts to isolate and social distance in response to COVID-19. I know how challenging this is for all of us, but it has given us time to reflect, time like we have not had for a long time to consider those things that we hold dear. It has provided us with time to consider how we might take action as things open up to overcome the challenges that the murder, the public execution of George Floyd has sparked globally. What is happening now with the ongoing protests and the demands for anti-racist actions is the manifestation of the hope, the resilience, the action of generations. It's not new. People are calling for human rights, social justice, for economic rights. They are calling for the end of racism and more equity. The land we now call Canada and its institutions were built upon the transatlantic slave trade and the displacement and colonization of First Nations people. Despite the first named African being free upon his entry to Canada in 1604 and acting as an interpreter for Samuel de Champlain. From vital functioning African civilizations, such as in Mali or Egypt or Songhai, people were captured, enslaved, and transported to the Caribbean, the United States, South America, and ultimately Canada. The first Canadian enslaved African was an 8-year-old boy named Olivier Lejeune, and that was in 1628. He had hoped that his conversion to Catholicism would make him free. It did not. Marie Joseph Angelique hoped for her freedom too, but when it proved elusive, her escape ended up causing the burning of Montreal. She was tortured and hanged for her audacity. Many other documented situations exist where hope was dashed. Chloe Cooley resisted enslavement, and when bound and carried across the Niagara River to be sold, her story of her stolen hope led the first Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, John Graves Simcoe, to draft what would become the first anti-slavery legislation. It was compromise legislation at best because other slaveholding members of government were unwilling to see an end to their property rights over their enslaved Africans. The enslaved Africans who supported the British during the American Revolutionary War hoped for the freedom that their support to the British forces would be honored in Canada. Later, the thousands who came to Canada on the Underground Railroad following the passage of the Slavery Abolition Act, hoped for a life free from bondage. The exodusters, African Americans who hoped to claim land in Canada's West, only to be considered or deemed unsuitable for Canada, or to be faced with exclusionary immigration laws, came anyways. And in the 1950s and 1960s, advocacy by Black people to amend the immigration laws opened the way for change in admission requirements. Hope was there even earlier when Black men joined the war effort to defend this country from the American Revolutionary War through to World War I and II. Many members of both sides of my family helped to defend this country, from women working in the war plant, creating munitions, through to all of the brothers in the Carty family, my cousins, serving. That they all came back was perhaps proof of hope. But what did they come back to? We are here. I am here because of the resilience, the actions, the hopes of generations of people of African descent in Canada. I am the hope of the Black loyalists, of the late loyalists, of the refugees of the War of 1812. I am the hope of the descendants of the Underground Railroad. I am the hope of these first 4 major waves of migration to this place we call Canada, because my presence here, our presence here, is built upon their agency, their survival, their perseverance, and their hope, their stories of hope. Black history is what I have worked on to affirm the Black community and to assist others in learning and understanding the long-term presence of Africans in Canada. Black history is about hope, since hope is about resilience, it's about action. I am also the hope of my children, and many years ago, when I saw they were being negatively impacted by the color of their skin, I was faced with an urgency and a commitment to act. Will you act? Black Lives Matter. How better to celebrate Canada in these times, and how perfectly situated you are to help bring about those changes.
Thank you, Rosemary. Those are certainly fighting words, and words that certainly are going to propel us to a more positive future. And thank you those who are asking questions. We will address your questions after our next speaker. And I'd like to introduce to you Michelle Douglas, Lbgtq human rights activist, to share her inspiration and her story. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, hello to everyone. What an honor it is to be here. I am still reflecting on the extraordinary words, powerful words of Rosemary and Hanadi. I thank them both for their passion and commitment to just making us a better country and, of course, a better world. I'm going to share some Canadian history that in some ways relates to quite a personal story for me, but of course it's just bigger than one person. But it's a story of history that plays out over the last 50 years or so in Canada that not a lot of people know about. So it's really an honor for me to share some of this, both personal story and Canadian history for you. In 1986, I was 23 years old. I was just recently had graduated from university, and I was so honored to join the Canadian Armed Forces. I was proud to serve. My family didn't have a history of serving in the military, but I was looking forward to becoming an officer in the military, and specifically to go into the military police branch. Well, I started in, and things seemed to be going pretty well from the very beginning. I actually was excelling in the environment in a way that I kind of hadn't at university or even in high school. But the discipline worked for me, the approach and my commitment, I think, to the work was really a good fit. Let me pause, though, to tell you what was happening at the same time in the Canadian Armed Forces around their policy with respect to LGBT people. By the mid-1980s, the military, of course, recall that the Canadian Charter of Rights was in play at that time. And the military said, you know, if you're gay, you can stay, but there are a few conditions. And these might surprise some of you to know what those conditions were. They said, if you're gay or lesbian, bisexual, transgender, you can actually stay in the military, but you'll never receive any more training. You'll never get a pay raise, no more postings, and no more promotions. So you're frozen. You are set out, segregated, made different, and humiliated. You're shamed. Of course, the military is an organization where you actually see success on the rank of your sleeve. You can see as you're advancing, your rank would increase, and someone starts to wonder, why isn't that person showing progress in their career? It's a pretty good way to out someone and understand that they would be subjected to this policy. Now, when I joined the military, I didn't really have an identity as an out lesbian. In fact, it was while I was in the military that I met someone, a fellow officer, and I really fell in love for the first time. She was wonderful. But I then started to realize how important it was to remain deeply closeted, lest I would be subjected to these policies. Well, I mentioned I was also doing well in my career. And part of that meant that I was promoted as the first officer ever to enter a unit known as the Special Investigations Unit, first female officer, I should clarify. And so when I went into this unit, it was really specialized work that we did. We investigated the most serious forms of criminality in Canada, things like espionage, sabotage, subversion, serious criminality, and allegations of homosexuality. So there I was, posted to the very unit that was tasked with rooting out or investigating allegations that someone may be gay. Well, I wasn't there for long. My boss one day came to me and he said, Michelle, gather your things. We're flying from the base in Toronto for an important case in Ottawa. We headed out to the airport, but just before we got there, he turned into one of the hotel strips by the airport and pulled into a hotel, told me to get out and to follow him. I was taken to a hotel room where I spent the next 2 days under interrogation about my sexual orientation. It turned out that it was just the start of the horrendous treatment I was going to experience. It was humiliating, degrading, it was shaming, and it had the kind of impact that stays with me today. I didn't know that anyone else was going through this kind of experience, but I now know that literally thousands of other people experienced the same kind of discrimination in a period of what's known as the LGBT purge. So despite that policy, they were still throwing people out. They were firing them. And that's exactly what happened to me. Despite a terrific service record and achievement, I was fired by the Canadian military in 1989. My release documents say I was, quote, not advantageously employable due to homosexuality. Well, so there I was, a young woman, my mid-20s, in shock in some ways. I intended to make the military my lifelong career. I was so proud to serve my country in that way. But I started to find out that, as I mentioned, thousands of people experienced a similar story to my own that had happened between the 1950s and the 1990s. And in fact, in that period of the purge, we think that about 9,000 Canadians experienced discrimination of this kind in the military, the RCMP, and the Canadian Federal Public Service. So, as you heard in my introduction, I brought a lawsuit against the military, and I was fortunate that it was my lawsuit in 1992 that formally ended the ban on service or the discriminatory policy on LGBT people serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. So there's justice for one person. So that launched me to become an activist, and I haven't stopped or slowed down for about 30 years now, because when there's injustice, it does call on you, and I think that's been a theme of this panel. When you see injustice, you really must act in the face of it. So fast forward to the results of some of that activism, along with many, many other people. In 2017, we were finally able to have an apology for this period of time from Prime Minister Trudeau. Many of you may remember the apology given in the House of Commons. The words, "I am sorry, we are sorry, we were wrong," ring true for me. It was a profound moment, and maybe in the Q&A, we want to talk about the power of apologies, because I think they're incredibly important and a valuable point for healing. But there was also an opportunity for a class action lawsuit to bring justice and some measure of reconciliation for those many other people, now about 1,000 or so, we think, living, that experienced the LGBT purge. And in a settlement, the likes of which has literally never been seen anywhere else in the world, all of those survivors of the purge who were participants in the class action lawsuit finally got some measure of justice. They finally received some financial compensation for being criminalized, harassed, assaulted, degraded, humiliated, shamed. Now, with this form of justice, well, it does help. It's an extraordinary, profound thing when there's some measure of justice. But as part of this unique settlement, we also did some really innovative things. And one of them is to form a fund, which I now have the honor to lead. The fund is roughly about $20 million as a result of the funds that would have gone to people had they lived long enough to see their day of justice. We're doing incredible things with that. I'm honored to share with you that we're building the LGBTQ2 National Monument that will mark this form of discrimination for all time. It'll be built in Ottawa. It's coming along. It'll be launched in 2025. We're collecting historical records. We're going to tell the story, and we're going to put on an exhibit at a museum to tell the story to others about what actually happened. Now, we're currently supposed to be launching that exhibit at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. And if anyone needs reminding about the fact that this journey of equality and pursuit of justice is not over, one needs only looking at the Museum for Human Rights and some of their own shortcomings, where LGBT content in the museum was recently, up to 2017, blocked off for those who may be offended by our mere presence and representation at the museum. So we're working on that. We're still trying to figure out how we can have responsible conversations to respect complex issues of the intersection of rights and ensure that LGBTQ2 people aren't disrespected in the meantime. So this is the work that's going on. It's active, it's passionate, and we're trying to help those survivors of the purge who now are often in their mid to late 60s and into their 70s. Many experienced formal diagnoses of PTSD, of trauma from those days. When you're traumatized about an essential part of you at a very young age, this is a life-altering moment, and it stays with people. These were good people trying to serve their country in the way they wished, and yet they were shamed and humiliated for it. We know many took their lives, many went back into the closet, and many just simply never kind of surfaced again to participate in community or live their full lives as their authentic selves. So we're working on those issues. And in the time of COVID, we're also helping others who are experiencing profound discrimination, for example, in seniors' homes, where they have to go back in the closet again sometimes because they are experiencing discrimination now in their elder years. So with that, I will pause and simply get ready to conclude by saying, if you're interested to know more about this, there's a terrific documentary. It's called The Fruit Machine. It chronicles the story of the purge. It's available free online through TVO, Television Ontario. So you can look it up, The Fruit Machine, and it'll tell this story in a powerful way for you, for your students, or for your families, so that you know more about this part of history. So with that, I thank you, and it's been a delight to join you all today.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And now we're getting questions coming in, and very good questions. We will try to be able to answer them all. And I'll start with questions to all panelists. And here's the question. Can you comment on the parallels and contrasts between various kinds of discrimination? And this is to each of the panelists. So let's start with the answer from Hanadi. Hanadi.
Yes, Michelle, sorry, I was on mute. Can you repeat the question, please, Michelle?
Yes, could you comment on the parallels and contrasts between various kinds of discrimination? So I guess each of your perspectives, if you could define the different kinds of discrimination that is being experienced.
Okay, can I answer in French?
Yes.
Can I answer it in French? Okay. So, si je comprends bien, c'est les différentes formes de discrimination qu'on demande, c'est ça?
Oui.
OK. De la part de Justice Femmes, les différentes, comme j'ai expliqué, c'est toutes sortes de discriminations. Ça peut être à l'embauche, ça peut être pour un emploi, un logement, une personne qui est discriminée à cause de sa couleur de peau, de son origine, de son appartenance à une religion. C'est toutes formes de discrimination qui sont définies. Et ça peut être aussi de la discrimination, ce qu'on appelle maintenant la discrimination systémique, comme des lois qui renforcent, comme j'ai donné tout à l'heure l'exemple de la loi 21, qui renforce le racisme systémique qui existe dans notre société. J'espère que j'ai répondu à la question.
Merci, Hanadi. Rosemary. You can respond to that question.
That's a really great question. And I hear what you said, Hanadi, but I think that there's certain things that are constants and you have no choice over, and that you can't hide or occlude them. So for example, ageism isn't going to happen until you are old, and then you cannot hide it, perhaps. Religion, certain instruments of your religious experience or identification, you might be able to hide them if you should decide to, or if you had to. Sexual orientation, in some instances, should you wish to or need to, you might be able to work around it or occlude it, hide it. But you can never hide being Black. Anti-Black racism is a constant. It doesn't happen when you're suddenly 18 and you looked at somebody the wrong way. It's there all the time. It's there, and it impacts you from birth to death, in addition to the intersectionality of possible ageism or possible sexism or possible religious discriminations. And so to me, that's the worst one. And it is a power dynamic. So when someone has power over you and can influence whether or not you get hired, that isn't just like that's important. How do you survive? How do you maintain your dignity? How do you create intergenerational wealth? Because somebody has decided they won't let you into their professional school, or they won't hire you, or they won't whatever it is. So that's an obtuse kind of answer, but I think racism, anti-Black racism, is a constant and something that you can't make a choice about expressing or identifying or being noticed as being a part of.
Thanks, Rosemary. Michelle, I'm sure you have a few words to say about this.
Well, I would align myself with many of the things said by Rosemary, certainly. I think what we're really talking about here is the impact of devastating oppressions. Right? We all experience them in different ways, and the effect of diminishment from racism, from bigotry, from hatred, from other forms of oppression has such a profound and damaging effect on people that it has consequences. So for family, it has consequences for not only the individual and family, but communities and then beyond. So I think when I hear a question like that, I take it on almost as a personal challenge to look for ways to stand up and against all forms of oppression, to be a way better ally, to be more educated. So today I was like very much listening to Hanadi and to Rosemary about what they were saying, so that I have a better basis to combat racism, to understand the work of Justice Femme. So, understanding these things, I think we're obligated to do that as we're on a pursuit of being better. Really, no one wants to be an oppressor. So the way to combat that is education, right? And that's why I couldn't have said yes more quickly to attending today, because I'm learning it's a way of self-growth, but community growth. I'm part of that path. And yeah, so terrific question.
Thank you, Michelle. And that's a great segue, your last comment, into another question we've got from our audience. And that is, what would you like to see happen in the classrooms to help further each of your goals? Maybe let's start with Rosemary. And I want to mention, Rosemary, that I know that you are the author of the book, Black History, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas, which also has a teacher's guide. So I know you don't want to promote me. I'm here to help promote your book. And so there you go. So how would you like to further your goals in the classrooms?
I think that the best way to further the goals of not just Black history, but I think equity in general, which is, I believe, what Michelle was speaking to, and Hanadi. I mean, if we each address our issues that are meaningful to us, then we have helped to make things better. But in general, I think that educators need to be able to open up the conversation and talk about those difficult things, things that make them uncomfortable, things that they think are just, even if they're not required, because if we wait for things to be required, a lot of discussions won't happen. I think that our young people are open and able and already aware of many societal issues and need teachers to help bridge their perceptions and provide safe spaces for them to talk about them. And so whether those issues have to do with understanding racism, which tracks back to Black history, which is seminal anti-racist education, or whether those are discussions about LGBTQ or ageism or whatever, how do you have, that is the point of a purposeful social studies education, to provide those spaces for that discussion. And I think personally, those discussions can start early and continue all the way through.
Thanks, Rosemary. Hanadi.
I join my voice to Michelle, to Rosemary, and I say, in a classroom, the teacher has to be an example or inclusion and everything of education, because this is the base of our society. It starts with education. That's why we are here, and we're talking about education. So the teacher and the school has to be the basic of inclusion, accepting everybody, and the teacher has to be an example. So in my opinion, if I talk about Quebec here and about the discrimination we are facing in our classroom, we have more than 52 different origins in the class. So teachers need to be educated from the side of diversity and accepting the others. Yes. In colors, religion, and everything. And it's a must in our education system.
Yes.
Thank you, Hanadi. Michelle.
Really not much to add there. They've been very comprehensive, I think, in the way I think on this as well. From my perspective, I think the teachers you're such incredible professionals. I mean, this is a profession that you do know these approaches, but I think looking for histories that aren't as prominent in the classroom and talking about those, and your students are probably experiencing or have experienced with some of those issues as well. I do acknowledge Rosemary's comment about safe space. I'm always really touched that some young people who may be transitioning to live as non-binary or fluid kids, or transitioning, they're unsure of their orientation or so just having language around that, I think, would be really helpful. It shows a form of respect to individuals that can literally be life-saving. And I think it's to Hanadi's point that this is really about modeling, and I just acknowledge and salute what you're doing, particularly in the midst of COVID. And you have my deepest respect, because I know it cannot be easy there.
Thank you, Michelle. I have a question for all of you, and certainly you've all been so resilient and have built resistance in your turmoils and your experiences. And what I'd like to know personally, what keeps you going? What keeps inspiring you to fight the fight in the face of all this adversity, negativity sometimes? But you three seem to radiate such positiveness and certainly such inspirational words. So I'd like to hear from each one of you. What keeps you going? Maybe start with Hanadi.
No, I want Michelle to start, please.
Okay.
Go ahead, Michelle.
I've thought about this question a lot. I do have a North Star, and I realized that I'm driven by the idea of participating in important conversations and service as as a bit of a North Star. I also realize that I can't walk away from a pursuit of something really important to me, which is justice and equality for others. And I never expected to be an activist, that is for sure. But when experiencing discrimination firsthand, you can't walk away. I just wish I would have realized that before I had to personally experience it. You all have a moment to kind of look within and think about your own resilience, even if you're not experiencing discrimination or hardship or challenge, about how you can help make someone else's journey better and easier. But also, I get a lot of inspiration from sessions like this, and it does help me be a bit stronger, which I'm not always that strong. I'll just be honest about that.
Thank you for your honesty, Michelle. Hanadi.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. So thank you too to let me speak English. So I saw myself speaking in English without thinking. So I will continue answering in English. So I think I'm thinking like Michelle. I don't want to do copy paste on you, Michelle, but you know, I as I said before we go on online on live, I'm from Lebanon. So I was born in a civil war. So I face all kind of what you can imagine, from violence, hate, discrimination. I came here, I was almost 21 years old. I faced this year too, all of you knows what's going on in Lebanon. So it made me, and my parents named me Hanadi, and Hanadi, my name is like la combattante. So it's for the protection of the community, you know. So I'm in all senses, and as Michelle said too, I'm not always strong, but I cannot support discrimination. I want equality for everybody, and this kind of session gives me a lot of inspiration and empowerment too, to see like Rosemary, like Michelle, and thank you very much to give us this space to share and to give hope to others to continue. And I want to say to everybody, don't even let no one discriminate you on because you are different in any way.
Thank you, Hanadi. Rosemary, the
But
last word.
Ça touche ma cœur. Merci, madame. I think, you know, something like what both of you have offered, I think that sometimes you do something because it's a continuation of purposeful actions you've been involved in for whatever range of reasons. And certainly I was in a purposeful, perhaps, what direction anyway. But after I went to university, I think that there was a part of me that wanted to believe that we really were post-racial. I wanted to believe that we really had achieved all those wonderful things that we had been discussing and debating during my bachelor's degree, my master's degree, that we really had arrived. I don't know why I felt that way. And then I had to deal with the reality of what my children were experiencing in my own neighborhood, what my children were experiencing, not consistently solely in school, but, you know, in terms of some of the curriculum materials still being invisible, not represented in any way, shape, or form. And this was in the French immersion stream or the regular stream. And it was like this reminder that if you don't see it, how is it going to be? Who's going to do it if you don't do it? And so ultimately, whether I wanted to or not, life put me in a position where I found myself as the head of the provincial heritage organization, the Ontario Black History Society. And in that moment, and leading up to that, ultimately, you have to be the change you want to see. You have to take that responsibility, even though you may not be perfect at doing it. But if you don't try, for sure, nothing's going to happen. And that's, I think, the message that I have for teachers. You may not have that perfect curricula yet that addresses LGBTQ issues, or that addresses systemic racism or anti-Black racism or ageism or religious discrimination. You can't wait to make those, start those discussions, start those projects, create the safe space, do the work. Because if you wait for perfection, for sure, it will never happen. And I was imperfect for 23 years as the president of the Ontario Black History Society. And if I hadn't chosen to do that, that organization wouldn't even exist to this day.
Thank you, Rosemary. Well, this was a fantastic panel. I mean, fantastic isn't even a good enough word to describe your experiences, you know, the inspirational experiences, and you know, the goals and the objectives that we all still continue to try to achieve. And certainly 2020 has been an unprecedented year. And I think everything that you've said is going to inspire us, our audiences, and future generations to keep up the fight, you know, to keep up the positive attitudes, to make things different and to make things happen. So I would like to thank the Association of Canadian Studies for giving us the opportunity to share all of our thoughts and perspectives, and also to thank our fantastic panelists. And I'm sure the audience can contact you going through the Association of Canadian Studies if they need more information. So thanks to Hanadi Saad, Rosemary Sadler, and Michelle Douglas for sharing everything that you've shared and being so honest with us. I'm Madeline Ziniak, also on the board of the Association of Canadian Studies, and would like to thank our audience and thank you for your questions. So hopefully we will all connect and continue our relationships in the future. Thank you all for watching.